Good day, everyone. My name is Chris Jonas. I'm the Director of Communications with the National Association for Business Economics, and we're pleased to present today's event. Before we start, I did want to mention a few other upcoming NABE events, including the 18th Annual NABE Foundation Economic Measurement Seminar, which will be taking place virtually August 9th through 11th. We have early bird registration available now on NABE.com for this event. And if you haven't heard, NABE's 63rd annual meeting will be taking place live and in person this year. Finally, September 26th through 28th, nearby in Washington, D.C. and Arlington, Virginia. Arranged around the theme Shock Shifts in the Emerging Economic Landscape, the conference will address the immediate global health crisis and related labor market supply chain disruptions. We will have virtual registration options available for those who cannot attend in person. Save the date for now, that's September 26th through 28th, and NABE will be releasing more information on programming, speakers, and registration details in the coming days. Also wanted to mention that NABE's Tech Economics Conference this fall will also be taking place in person. That will be November 7th through 9th in Seattle, Washington, with hybrid registration options available for that as well. Also do want to mention NABE's job board is econjobs.org, the leading career site for economists connecting job seekers to employers in industry, government, and the nonprofit sector. And head over to econjobs.org to post your resume for free or apply directly to hundreds of open positions in economics. Okay, now on to today's event. Note that we'll have Q&A open throughout today's discussion. You can go ahead and submit a question to the panelists at any time using the Q&A box. It's my pleasure now to introduce our moderator. Former NABE President Constance Hunter is Chief Economist with KPMG. Constance, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you everyone for joining. We have a wonderful panel today. And you know that old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I think I would say in the economics profession, it's both what you know and who you know. And so we are fortunate today to be joined by an amazing roster of people. So first up is John Harpole. John is a consultant with SpencerStuart's Leadership Advisory Services, and he is a member of the firm's financial services practice. John has more than 20 years principal capital advisory and institutional investment experience encompassing public equities, alternative, and real assets. And so John joined SpencerStuart from an institutional investment consultancy. Earlier in his career, John advised alternative asset fund sponsors and as a senior project manager in JP Morgan Chase's private fund group, and later as the founder and principal of a FINRA registered advisory firm that originated and executed client mandates in the US and abroad. Now, John is a native of Milwaukee. He earned his bachelor's degree from Dartmouth College and an MBA from the Amos Tuck Graduate School of Business. He is a former Foreign Service officer in the U.S. Department of State. John served on assignment in Washington, D.C., and is a staff aide to the American ambassador in Bogota, Colombia. So in his role as a headhunter, he is really well positioned to understand some of the ways that business economists interact, both in the asset management field and in many other fields, given his financial services background. So it makes him really an ideal partner for those of you that are looking to move to that next step in your career. And I'm sure he'll be grilling the rest of us and sort of critiquing our career paths and letting you know where we could have, where we've done well and maybe where we could have done better. Next up, we have Sam Khater. Sam is the Vice President, Chief Economist, and Head of Freddie Mac's Economic and Housing Research Division. He is responsible for research analysis and forecasts of the macroeconomy with a special focus on housing and mortgage markets. Sam came to Freddie Mac from CoreLogic, where he served as Vice President of Research and Deputy Chief Economist. He His responsibilities include producing original research and advising clients, regulators, policymakers, and investors on real estate and mortgage market trends. As a compelling spokesperson with a unique ability to translate complicated subjects, he is regularly quoted in national, local, and real estate trade media outlets. Prior to joining CoreLogic, Mr. Khater was a senior economist at Fannie Mae and an economist at the National Association of Realtors. Finally, we have Steve McBride. He is a director of economics at Amazon, having joined Amazon 8 months ago, so new to his role. And he leads the devices economics team, the team whose mission it is to improve product development, pricing, and monetization in the Amazon devices business through the application of science across the product lifecycle. This centralized team leverages the complementary skills and expertise of economists, scientists, product managers, and engineers to deliver innovation for current and future customers. Prior to joining Amazon, Steve managed several science teams at Netflix over his 4 years, including marketing science, pricing, and constant programming and valuation. Steve previously led valuation science and analytic functions at SurveyMonkey and Pandora. Steve started his career in economic consulting, spending 6 years on a variety of litigation and long-term valuation cases at Analysis Group. Steve holds a PhD in economics from Stanford, master's degrees from Yale Law School and Queen's University, and a bachelor's degree from Simon Fraser University. So we have not only both coasts represented here, but we have a bit of macro and a bit of micro represented, which is important. I would say if we were holding this webinar a decade ago, I would be saying to you that most chief economists tend to have a macro background, or tend to be slightly stronger in macro than micro. That is changing pretty rapidly, I think. With the advance of tech economics, there is a lot more need for microeconomics up at the C-suite. And I think something that all of us do probably is advise our own firms on strategic decision making at the C-suite level. So I know I'm part of our growth and strategy leadership team. I'm part of the leadership team of the firm. And so in important strategic decisions that KPMG is taking, we're using economic analysis to help inform and guide those decisions. So that's something that I would say is very different about the role of chief economist than other economic positions you might find in firms. But before going on about my own experience, why don't I turn it over to Sam? Do you want to talk for 5 minutes about your career, sort of what got you to where you are, what made you want to be a chief economist, and what are some of the skills that you wish you had known that you needed to acquire along the way that are really important to the day-to-day in your current role as chief economist?
Sure. Thank you, Constance, and welcome everyone. I'm delighted to be with you. So, coming out of undergrad, I was a dual major, finance and economics, and the plan was to go into finance, but I graduated in a recession that really hammered the financial markets. And I was always interested in economics, but particularly I got the econ bug after taking a public policy class, which really sort of got beyond the sort of the blackboard analyses that I think sometimes is a bit too abstract. And so I got an internship with the National Association of Realtors, and I started to read academic papers, and that's when the sort of the light and the bug, and the kind of the inspiration that I still have to this day, where I just love to read economic research because I think it really helps me understand the world around me and helps me make better decisions. I moved to Fannie Mae when I was fairly junior, when I had an opportunity. And when I got to Fannie, it was actually really interesting because it's a very large financial institution and you can easily sort of get lost within some of these giant organizations. But it was a great way to learn from many different people in an organization. And I came to a fork in my career in terms of sort of thinking about graduate school and also thinking about my career. At the time, I was sort of headed towards getting a PhD, but I was a bit disillusioned with the programs that I saw out there. I was interested more in heterodox programs, which tend to be more in Europe. And so then I found a program at Georgetown University in network economics, which sort of teaches economics a bit differently. You're looking at feedback loops and multiple equilibria and things like that. And so I wanted to challenge myself versus kind of the day job that I had in terms of the economic world and sort of extend my knowledge. It also had a strong communication part of the program. And I felt like I really needed to really increase my skill, communication and visual presentation skill sets. I was always strong on the quant side, but I felt like I really needed to improve that. And then I also came to sort of a fork as it came to where I wanted to work next. When I was leaving Fannie, I had 2 job offers on the table. One was a very large financial institution, extremely well respected, essentially a dream job that I really never thought I would have the opportunity for. Another was a very small collateral risk startup that was not well known. And I decided to roll the dice. And the reason I went with the collateral risk startup is I felt like I needed to basically take a chance. I've worked in a large financial institution where you tend to be fairly specialized. I wanted to basically sort of learn to increase my toolkit by working at a much smaller organization and much faster organization. And so I went to the CoreLogic, which was back then I was employee number 178, something like that. They're now a 6,000 person company. And some of you, like Steve, who work in the tech industry, they sort of rode the rocket up, and that was fantastic. It really helped me interact with very senior leadership, but you also have to do a lot of things on your own. You don't have specialized folks to help you along the way in many different ways that you really get coddled in a large environment. And so I think for me, taking those calculated risks and challenging yourself, for me personally, in terms of grad school, sort of taking a non-traditional program, and then jumping to a smaller employer that sort of offers more opportunities to do things and grow up, really helped me in my career, and that eventually led my path to Freddie Mac, where I'm the chief economist today. And just to tell you a little bit about the group, the way Constance, the way you laid out sort of the traditional versus more recent, the macro versus micro, I think is exactly spot on. We have a traditional macro group. We've also got a small micro group. We recently created, and you and I have talked about this in the past, a small data science team to really help marshal all the frontier data and also a lot of the internal data. I think one thing lots of large, well-established companies are not good at is mining their own internal data. This is probably something that Steve is very, very good at, and the tech sector is really good at. And so that's the part that I think is particularly interesting and exciting for me, because it's really complemented the other 2 groups really well. So let me stop there, and Constance, I'll turn it back to you.
Oh, great. That was a fabulous overview. So Steve, I'm gonna turn to you next.
Awesome. Hey everyone, Steve McBride. My pronouns are he, him. As Constance said, I'm now at Amazon, and I've been there about 8 months. I like the name or the title of this panel, this webinar, because it really ties to my experience. Definitely parts of what I know and parts of people that I've known. And so I'm at my 5th company post-grad school. And my first transition was really deliberate. It was a focus on additional skill development for my quantitative strengths. And so I moved in those directions, and that's how I exited consulting and got into working for companies, Pandora in that case. And then increasingly I focused on the skills that became more resonant, and ones that I encourage folks on this call to think about as you look for, maybe your first career jump or your second. And so that was really thinking about narrative, kind of communication skills, perhaps language that would be derisively called kind of soft skills, but the skills that you would have that would make you more effective in a business where you need to advise and influence strategic leaders in your business. I think another is just taking a step back from the technical skills that most of us are imbued with, or are definitely encouraged to focus on, are complementary skills. Which skills from people that you will work with that will make you better? And in my first industry job after consulting, I learned so much working with product managers, engineers, scientists with other technical disciplines, and realizing how economists in general thought about problems, and how that amplified the skills of some neighboring members of technical personnel, and finding ways to collaborate with those individuals so that I was more impactful and effective in my role, as were they. And so some really rewarding things, but basically focusing on skills that are not directly about you executing, but the ways that you force amplify or are more effective working with others, complementary skill sets. I think as part of that, something that I encourage folks here to think about, it ties to some of the ideas that Sam was articulating around Freddie Mac, is scale points. So, you know, so much of perhaps what you learned in grad school and what you're doing in your current role is your coding or writing the draft document. And I think a lot of the next steps of your careers are finding ways to have systems execute that, or managing other people to do it. And if you see that as actually a core part of how you advance in your career, I think you'll be investing appropriately in the right human capital and pushing yourself to review the materials that you would need to really move in those directions. A lot of them are not what you're taught in grad school, but they're actually kind of core to how you'll continue to advance. And I think as I thought about scaling both from systems and then through peers, I found a path to move towards managing scientists and economists. And I've now done that at 3 companies. I think as part of that, you know, again, it was a deliberate investment in ways to advance. I jumped to Netflix and then after 4 years there, moved on to Amazon, in part inspired by the people that I knew at those companies, met at meetups or some, like, in fact, NABE meetups, in fact, is actually what got me to Netflix. And then Amazon.
Service at NABE. We give you what you know and who you know.
Yeah, gosh, I guess that was February of 2015. Was at the SF Tech meetup for economics, and Randall Lewis and I were next to each other. He was at Netflix at the time, and that was kind of the path to move on and be his boss there. And then Amazon, just lots of, I think we all know, a lot of economics depth and talent and breadth across the giant span of this company in different spaces. I lead devices, which is the consumer electronics business. So, I lead economics as it relates to that. I got here based on kind of continued and long-term relationships with some of the leaders here, or people who've worked here. And so I used my network to explore whether or not this was the right next step for me, and use that to really push and understand the boundaries of the role, or helping to craft the role so that it played to my strengths, or the areas that I want to grow. And so it was a lot of pull factors that helped me land this role. 8 months ago now, and having a lot of fun leading a team of about 55, with tying to the themes of complementary skill set and scales. More than half of my organization are engineers, and how they complement the skills and mindset of a lot of causal researchers of economics or related disciplines. So that's my story, and it kind of ties to a lot of the skills and areas of focus that I expect will come up a lot today.
Great, thank you. So I'll just speak briefly about my career path. I, out of graduate school, thought that I was going to carry on and continue my PhD, but started working in foreign exchange at what was then Chase Manhattan Bank. And this was a really exciting time to be in foreign exchange, because we, were having so many countries converge in preparation for the Eurozone that was going to be happening in the year 2000. This was the early 90s. And so really got to see the embodiment of economics and politics, and how that impacted interest rates and foreign exchange rates, and what all of the transmission mechanisms were. And I would say one of the key things that I learned during that period of my career was what to ignore. So if you think about every day we had to come into work and look at what happened overnight in the markets and figure out what to focus on, what was the most important information for our traders and our salespeople who spoke to our clients to know with regard to economic, geopolitical, and market movements, and really figuring out how to focus on what to pay attention to and what to ignore. And then, like Sam, you know, as I continue to read economic research, I think is where I got very excited about developing my own areas of research and piggybacking off of research that I was reading. And then deploying my skills in asset management for a number of years, and really, again, very applied economic analysis. Moving to KPMG, which I did 8 years ago, to basically create the Office of the Chief Economist. We were obviously serving a great number of financial services firms, but a great number of our clients were clients where I had either held their debt or equity when I was on the asset management side. And so really having a view towards what are the economic indicators that impact sectors and then impact specific companies, and being able to bring that depth and insight to conversations with our clients, some of whom have their own chief economists and some of whom don't have chief economists. And so this is, you know, a completely new conversation to have with them. For those that have chief economists, if I know that chief economist, I'll usually reach out to them before I go speak to their leadership team, just to kind of get an idea where we're in agreement, where we're maybe not in agreement, what some of their pressure points are, in terms of there's things I can help them reinforce, or maybe things where we have a slightly different view, and then provide their leadership team with a different perspective. And I would say that one of the I would say the biggest differences in being the chief economist, and certainly the type of role that I hold, is that I really pine for those days when I could spend all day in Haver looking through data and conducting research. So I think, Steve, your point about you have to get to the point where you're directing others to do this work and developing the skills where you learn to scale is really, really key. So John, before I turn it over to you, I'm just going to echo back what I think I heard were the main points. So Sam, you know, you talked about reading academic research. 100% agree. That's sort of one of the joys of my day, and where I get some really good ideas. And we're bringing that academic research to a practical level, to our leadership team, to leadership teams at our clients, is really, really valuable. Communication skills, obviously critically important. I think the more you move into a senior economist or deputy or chief economist role, you spend your time communicating as much with non-economists as economists, and being able to be that translator is really, really important. And then you know, data science and economics are coming ever closer together. We see that at NATF with our Tech Economics Conference. We see it in our own firm. Sam, you talked about it, and Steve, obviously your entire career is evidence of that. And then, you know, making career choices, as Steve said, to really making it a career choice so that you say, wow, at this firm, I'm going to get to do this type of work, which is going to really round out my skill set. Being intentional in that way is really, if you can do that, very, very important, and will go a long way to making sure you advance. I wholeheartedly agree with the scale points, skill set, you know, point that Steve made. And then finally, you know, the path forward is managing economists and scientists, data scientists. So we at KPMG also have teams of data scientists, and working closely with them and bringing some of the macroeconomic or econometric tools more to bear on the data science process tends to be pretty accretive to the organization. So something that I am constantly sharpening the saw on. So attended NABE's machine science or machine learning for data scientists or economists, a great class. I probably need to take it again, but it pointed me in the right direction and gave me some basis. So now when I go and read textbooks on this subject, I have a little more practical knowledge that I can apply. And it's an area where I need to keep learning. I think that's the other thing about economics that I found throughout my career. You can't just go to graduate school and then that's it, right? The field is constantly changing and evolving. We're finding new data and information. We're finding new ways to work with data, and we're gaining better and new insights that we can build upon. So it's definitely, if you like to be a lifelong learner, this is a wonderful career, because I think those opportunities are really infinite and endless. So with that, John, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's get your perspective as someone who helps firms hire economists. What are those firms looking for, and what do people really need to know if they want to build the building blocks that are going to help them get to that senior or chief economist role? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry about that. We had everybody go on mute to reduce background noise.
Yeah, I've only been doing this for a year and a half, and I still can't find the button. It's pathetic. And so, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity, Constance, and also to Tom and Chris, and also it's a pleasure to spend time with you, Sam and Steve. I think it's very helpful out of the gate I want to give you a little bit of background, and then I'll start diving into questions to your question, Constance. So SpencerStuart is one of the 5 largest leadership advisory firms in the world. And what I often tell people is what we do is what's important distinction is that we're in the retained search business. And what that means is we don't, I will also tell people all the time that we actually don't have jobs, right? Which is a weird thing to say because we place 5,000 executives a year. What that really means is we work directly with companies who have a need, and we go and help these companies as a consultant advisor to help them identify critical attributes for top talent. And then we leverage the global network that we have in order to bring the best talent to bear on behalf of our clients. So that's the first thing to understand about this business at this level. And I say this to this collected group that's on the other side of the screen here. You're on the cusp of your career of moving from, that early economist to the middle ranks to now you're aspiring to that deputy or to that chief role. And that's when you'll begin to see us. And this is the perspective that I would like to offer to you of once you're shooting for the top, what is the top looking for? So that's part one. Part two is by way of background personally. Amongst other things at SpencerStuart, with my colleague Tom Daniels, I co-lead for effectively a Federal Reserve practice. We've had the good fortune to work of 8 of the last Fed district presidents, heads of Soma Manager in New York, head of markets, multiple heads of Super Reg, multiple first vice presidents. We continue to do Federal Reserve work today. We also do a fair amount of work in the GSE system. We've done work be it actually at Sam's shop, with Freddie, at Fannie, MSRB, FINRA, so self-regulatory organizations as well. That's the type of work we do. And in the course of that work, obviously you're going to run across a lot of economists, but I'll say our work in a way we focus on the discipline goes beyond that. And don't worry, Steve, I'm getting to you, is we've worked with executives, and I want to make sure that this responses that I'm giving you are really broad to all the people on the call. We've identified people in market microstructure, and industrial organization, macroeconomics, right? Labor economics, trade economics. And what's particularly exciting for us as we see this, frankly, witch's brew of econometrics, behavioral economics, right? And ultimately data analytics combined potentially with AI to turn this into more of a predictive discipline. And that's extremely powerful potentially down the road. And so that's an area which is emerging. There's lots of confluence. And again, I'm pointing at Steve here because I'd love to get that perspective. But what the point of this sort of long thing is a little bit to tell you about our business, to tell you about the type of roles that are out there, but also to let folks know that this conversation, I think Constance referred to this, we're just not talking to just the macro people in the world, in the room, right? We're talking about to all of you who've engaged in a incredibly dynamic discipline. I love Sam's comment on finding the heterodoxic approach, right? There is the way to think about economics, at least the way we think about it, is it's a version of applied mathematics that allows you to ask interesting questions. If you understand the fundamental nature of what economics is, right, that helps you, as Steve's point is, to engage with other people who have some technical common points to, again, ask and pursue interesting questions. And then the challenge becomes like, okay, well, once you learn how to ask and pursue interesting questions, how do you present those questions and responses? Not necessarily answers, right? Sometimes it's just frames, right? That are timely, right? That are relevant, right? And that can be repeated by somebody who is not a subject matter expert. And that's really the trick. At some point, right? At some point, you are going to have a chance, like you are going to be engaged in either a strategic level discussion, meaning committing significant capital in the enterprise, right? Which all you know is a stochastic exercise. So they're going to go to the comments and what does the future state look like? And there's a desire to say, look, there's a lot of implied, but at the end of the day, there might be several $1 billion at stake. So you need to have a succinct answer. You don't have to be right. You have to be rational, right? And you have to be able to integrate views from engineering, from finance, from other parts of the organization in order to substantiate the commitment of real dollars in real time, right? And so the discipline of taking what is a powerful intellectual tool set, an intellectual exercise, and also desire to ask interesting questions, but to frame it in a way that is, for lack of a better way of putting it, market. That's hard. And Steve said something very, very important as well, is that one of the other key things is you also have to develop these soft skills, which many people don't think of. Turns out the world turns on those. It just does. And it's not only soft skills, and I'll come back to your Economist here and I'll stop in a second, is your ability to influence and to inspire confidence is critical, right? Be it within the organization, if you're dealing with investor relations, if you're dealing with the street, but even internally, inspiring confidence is really essential. But also, and again, I promised I'd bring this back into the frame of economics. Remember, one of the neat things about the emergence of behavioral economics and prominence in the last 20 years, it also gives you insights into decision-making traps as well, okay? And so if you have that acknowledge and see the power of human engagement, and you combine that with the tool set that all of you have nurtured, you have a very promising career across a wide range of opportunities. So that was long-winded on my part, Constance. I'm went a little bit over, but I'll give you back the mic.
All right. Well, that was very, very helpful. I guess I'm going to ask John you a question first, but we have some really great questions coming in from the audience. Keep them coming. But what is the biggest gap you see when candidates maybe come to you and say, "Hey, I'm interested," or when you see people apply for jobs and you decline to put them forward to the client? What are the areas where they're the biggest gaps and the reasons for those decisions where you say, you know what, these people are just not ready to put forward to this client for this role?
So there are a couple of ways of answering that, right? One way is straight up qualifications. That's not driven by me, that's by my clients, okay? And so the clients often will have, and one of my jobs is to help the client understand the role itself. And this is a weird thing, but I'm sure you guys all know this. Oftentimes, and Constance, since you created a capability, you know this really well, people have a sense of what an economist is, and maybe have a sense that we need an economist, but don't entirely know what that means, okay? And so helping the client frame very clearly what that means is really one of the critical functions that we perform. But once they frame that need, there are some characteristics, be it, there's a subdiscipline of economics they're part of. Do you have the terminal degree or not, right? Those are sort of the table stakes. But once you get all that settled, then it comes down to the sort of interpersonal characteristics for success, right? And at the end of the day, it depends on the role, right? There are, and I sort of was thinking about this earlier, there are the traditional roles, say a staff economist, right? Where you're analyzing data, right? You're, like you were hinting at, curled up on a snowy day next to a fire reading Haver data sets. That's a new one for me. And, producing regular, timely reporting. That's a very traditional role, right? But then there are market-facing economists like you have on the street who are trying to do this, but now have traders who want that information, not perfect, they want something actionable, right? And the biggest trap, and that it also shows up in investor relations types, right? And then there's another level where there are folks who are involved with strategic planning, right? The biggest challenge for individuals as you're going through those different roles is, if you are of that traditional staff economist type and want that sort of smooth transition, that's fine. There are plenty of roles that do that. But becoming timely and frankly, becoming comfortable with uncertainty, right? And imperfect information but still being comfortable that you can deliver imperfect, timely information to the principals and then adjust as you go. That's really critical, right? That takes a great deal. That's its own discipline, and it takes its own level of confidence. And that's really what clients want and demand. And the challenge is for many economists, right, particularly folks who've gone all the way down to, pursued their terminal degree and maybe spent time in academia, that's extremely difficult, right? If you were in the research department of the Minneapolis Fed and then you're going into the street, that's just hard.
Well, and it's one of the reasons, and we got a question about certification. NABE created the Certified Business Economist designation because we were finding the sort of senior leadership at NABE were finding that we were trying to hire people, and even PhD economists that really didn't have all the skills necessary to be business economists. And we are actually, NABE is in the process of continuing to evolve and revamp the CBE to now include some of the tech economics qualifications that really, as Sam and I both said, we're having to know and apply and manage in our organizations, even though they're not, tech firms. Really, every firm today is a tech firm. Every firm today is using data to make better decisions. And so we all need to be tech economists. I'm going to open it up to some of the Q&A that's come in. So what kind of jobs should PhD graduates be looking for if they are interested in empirical I/O and data analysis? And I'm going to just ask anyone who can answer that to unmic yourself and go for it.
Sure, I can answer that. I have 3 new PhDs with empirical I/O hired this year, joining my team. So I have some perspective there. I can't speak to how many are at Amazon, but it's probably around 40 with that background, early career. And so we certainly have opportunities. There are other tech companies that hire that particular portfolio or profile. I think that there's fewer though. It's a profile that's certainly appealing to lots of other companies that are hiring or industries, and some of those can deliver, some of the soft skills or business acumen skills that we've talked about. But Amazon certainly hires lots of that profile to start your career, where you learn a lot within our community.
Thanks. So I have a question from someone. They said it's more of a comment, but they're having difficulty relating because they're saying that it's a really harsh field, that they're having difficulty finding jobs and what to do if you're stalling or struggling. And I would actually, and they sort of refer to some past time where there was this golden period for economists. And I would say a few things about that. One, I think it's really important for economists to be integrated in the profit centers of their firms. Very often economists are considered cost centers traditionally. I wrote a paper on this, or a sort of a note, I would say, for business economics a number of years ago. And so really think about how what your skill set can bring to improving the bottom line of any firm that you're considering working for. Another thing I would say is that if you're having trouble finding work right now, it may be that you don't have all the right hard skills. I would consider trying to get a certified business economist designation. We offer a number of classes that support people that may not come with all of those skills at the outset. And because we are still very much in a golden age for economists. In fact, the BLS forecasts over the next 10 years that economics jobs will grow by 14%, which is about 3.5 times more than what they forecast for the overall labor market. So if you're struggling right now, I would sort of do a hard inventory of your both hard technical skills and soft skills. And really, as you peruse job listings, and you can find a lot of them on Econ Jobs, but obviously company websites, really think about what it is maybe that you need in your toolkit to more successfully apply to these jobs. And I would say Sam or Steve or John, if you have any additional comments for this person. Yeah, Sam.
Sam, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So I want to connect two comments that Constance and John said, and try and do it succinctly, which is that I think one way to help sort of spark and maybe get out of the rut, for the lack of a better word, is to read well outside your discipline. So one thing I do is to sort of challenge myself is to read well outside the housing and mortgage space, and this really helps me to connect things I'm seeing in the mortgage market to other industries or to other episodes temporarily over time. And this goes straight to John's point, which is sort of getting above the staff level, sort of descriptive economist, and sort of, how do we connect this to other industries or what we've seen in the past, and prescribe what we should do, which is very, very difficult in a vague environment. So I think being able to sort of transgress boundaries and get outside of the industry that you're in terms of seeing what other industries are running into in that same problem, sort of parallel problems, I think can be really helpful and really sort of spark the creative juices inside you. I find that some of the best ideas I come up with for me is when I just read outside of my discipline. And this could be even well outside the economics discipline, because I have housing economics on my brain all the time, and then I'll find inspiration in many other disparate topics.
Yeah, and that's great.
I would also think it's spot on. And really to build off of that is, remember, reading outside the area is important, but thinking outside of the area is important as well. Remember, we go back to what essentially is it that you do as an economist? You ask really interesting questions in a quantitative manner. Well, it turns out you could very easily, if you're looking for a job that have the title economist, there might be times where it's a hot sector and it might not be. But guess what? A lot of work that economists do, yes, are in data science, but also in marketing and in market research. Or another great example is, sure enough, in supervision and regulation, right? It does not necessarily sound like, gee, that doesn't sound like economics, but I'll just use the Federal Reserve example. Traditionally, the Federal Reserve would send a bunch of bank examiners to an institution. They'd be resident there for several weeks to do a supervision exam. In the last 5-10 years, they've moved to what's called horizontal regulation, right? Particularly for the largest firms. And that's using broad, very detailed, extremely complex econometric modeling in order to take a look at systemic risk across large sectors of the banking sector. What turns out, yes, it's supervision, but the tools that they're using are deep in economics. And so a little bit of creativity in how you're thinking about your field and how those disciplines apply broadly, which would be enhanced, as Sam's pointed out, by more broad reading, right, and more broad engagement, that should help improve your prospects. Again, the more targets you have, the more likely you are to down a bird.
I think that ties into a question that we have: what should the balance be between developing oneself as a generalist, surface level knowledge on many topics, versus a specialist, lots of knowledge on one or two or a few topic areas? And Steve, I'd love to get you to weigh in on this, but my view is, one of the things I found, especially coming to KPMG, because it's a business that's so broad and we serve so many different sectors. And there were a number of economic questions that businesses wanted me to ask and answer. And some of them fell into micro and some of them fell into macro. And so really learning how to be autodidactic, having a network that you can call on of other economists who may be specialists in certain areas, and then really knowing how to do that skill that you learn in graduate school of knowing how to do research, knowing how to teach yourself about a subject, knowing how to find the data relevant in that subject, and knowing how then to provide insight. So having the ability to learn and acquire specialist knowledge as needed, I think is very, very helpful, because the field is always changing. We are always learning and growing, and I think that's a pretty critical skill. Steve, I'd love for you to, since you're in a more technical field, perhaps maybe you can shed some light on this question.
Yeah, great question. I think at a minimum, you need to specialize in methods. I think some of our differentiating characteristics, building on John's point about we want to ask interesting questions. And I think as a discipline, we have the mindset to do so. But I encourage you all to continue to meet the bar for technical capacity to answer some of those questions. And so on the general versus specialized point, specialize in the methods that allow you to answer those questions. On the domain point, the sort of general knowledge, Amazon's a place where, given our breadth, we have an opportunity to be a subject matter expert in all sorts of parts of the business and transfer over time among them. And given the number of economist or related roles that we have at different points of careers, there's lots of opportunities to start out, become an expert, and try something new. And so you can have the best of both worlds. If you want to stay specialized, you can continue to do that in a domain, or use your acumen and experience to move to a new one. On subject matter experts, I was specialized in the valuation of digital goods for a long time, and I've moved to physical consumer electronics. So my own career is an example of focus on methods and passion for the types of problems that a business would be interested in, and resolving them on a timeline that works is probably more valuable at the margin, though.
So we have a question. Can speakers give advice on what current students graduating with a BA in economics search for after graduation with regard to internships or jobs before starting a master's degree? Or what does one do with the terminal BA degree, private sector versus public? So, Jonathan, I'm sure you can speak to this, but at the Fed, you really have limited advancement capacity if you have a BA, a little more advancement capacity with a master's, but you really need a PhD. There are a number of private sector jobs where a BA, where you can go in with that BA depending upon the type of BA you have, and I would say how quantitative you are. You're going to be able to go in and find some entry level roles, but if you really want to advance and sort of ask the tougher questions, you need the technical skills that a graduate degree is going to give you. That's my 2 cents. Anyone else want to add in?
Constance, I'll add one is don't forget the nonprofits, meaning sort of think tanks in particular, because they offer lots of really interesting opportunities, particularly for those straight out of undergrad, and you can, I think, learn a lot. And to John's point, sort of make your research very actionable, because a lot of it has a policy orientation. The other is I would also look at state and local governments. They employ many economists, particularly on the economic development side. And they're sprinkled throughout the U.S. obviously, so they're in every municipality, and they sort of offer opportunities to produce analysis that's very actionable, very tangible, is related to economic development or housing development, that I find particularly interesting.
So we have a question, what are long-term career paths for economists? What happens to people who don't become a chief economist? And that's a really good question. We have a number of people on our team who are senior, but who are obviously not chief economist. And so I'll let some others answer first, but happy to weigh in at the end. Steve, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'd start by kind of underlining the point that title matters less versus focusing on what you want in your career and be deliberate in seeking that. And so, if you have the choice between a particular company and that title, or a different company in a place where you're driving greater advantage for customers and you're happier, I would always encourage that you don't take the title. I think there's lots of paths at Amazon and lots of other places where you can advance in your career. There's paths to be an individual contributor, which is tech language for someone who continues to code. And you can be a staff economist or principal economist, highly distinguished thinkers and contributors in their space who just don't manage people. And for some people, that's ideal. Some of those people are former feds, some of them are former academics, some of them are people who've deliberately advanced in that direction in their career. My career has moved towards managing teams, and that's another path. Consistent with my movements over time, you have had lots of opportunities to pursue new places or new roles to continue to grow. And certainly at Amazon, there's lots of those internally.
Sam?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Sorry,
sorry,
Sam,
John.
go ahead.
John, go ahead. Actually, Steve summarized it very well.
Yeah, he did. And I think it's at a certain point, it's the attributes that matter. And over time, people are going to engage with judgment, a track record of judgment, and with your ability to engage a variety of stakeholders. And those stakeholders are internal. They're from different verticals. It could be operations. It could be, data support. They could be, if you're a public company, it's shareholders. If you're an investment organization, it's investors. Your ability to move and express that confidence and to manage indirectly as well as directly, that opens up to a totally broad set of horizons. And really what's happening, and this is what really going back to the origin of this call, is that transition from that middle tier upwards is ultimately what we're talking about. Sam's hit on this, Constance hit on it, Steve has hit on it, is developing yourself as a leader, right? And there's a point you have to decide, do you want to be somebody who leads? And if you're not one to lead, you can still do very, very well. The only thing I would challenge from Steve, say, like, I do understand, somebody who codes is an individual contributor. That's true. But guess what? In many ways, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, is a senior director at a McKinsey. Now, sure enough, you have teams working for you, whatnot, but at the end of the day, you're that subject matter expert who's going to clients, and that person makes an awful lot of money if that's your objective function. So you can be somebody who has, or I should think of somebody like I'll just name Rich Clarida, right, who's now vice chairman of the Fed. Before that, he was chief economist at PIMCO. Now, mind you, he did have the chief title, but that was not a big team, right? So again, it's what got him there was reputation, skills, and the ability to convey confidence to leaders and other stakeholders. That's where your optionality comes down to at most senior levels.
That's great, John. Thank you. What I always tell people is figure out what your edge is, right? Everybody has their edge, right? That is the combination of their educational experience, the skills they've acquired, their personality, maybe unique life experiences that they had that taught them things that give them a perspective. And then, figure out what is the economic rent you can derive from your edge, right? And once you identify that for yourself, you will have job satisfaction more than likely. And that may be the chief economist title or the deputy chief economist title. It may be a senior economist role. And, it is a field where we need specialists, right? We need people with a certain level of education and experience and hard and soft skills. And so I think probably more than many other departments in firms, I know my department, for example, is pretty top heavy. We do have junior roles, but we have way more senior roles than we have junior roles. So there is absolutely a place for people who are senior economists, but don't end up becoming chief economists, and a lot of, I think, career satisfaction and enjoyment in many of those roles. Sam.
Constance, yeah, if I may make a comment, I want to jump on a comment that John made earlier, which is really important, and I'm seeing a lot of questions around it, which is sort of, how do we find some of these jobs? And I think I just want to reiterate the comment he made, which is, since we're just talking about titles, which is that a lot of economist titles don't have the title economist.
Mm-hmm.
And so for example, at Freddie Mac, we have my team, which is about a dozen economists, but there are a lot more economists outside of my team than on my team. So we've got, at least 70 or 80 economists around the company. Some of them work in credit modeling. So if you're looking at in the financial circles, look at credit, look at prepayment, community development. There's a function within that. There's marketing, research, right? John hit right on that. And so there are lots of roles that use the economic toolkit that we learn, but they may not have the title. So I think if you want to sort of expand the potential opportunities that you're looking for, is to literally just use different words in terms of, it's almost like a librarian in terms of to find some of these jobs that are out there, because there are a lot of these analytical roles out there, and they've really greatly expanded given the explosion of sort of the availability of sort of exhaust data or corporate data that's just sort of sitting there that many companies want to mine. And so I think sort of having a more expansive mindset of all the jobs that are out there. I cannot tell you how many times I have looked at jobs on paper that I was sort of not crazy about, but a friend of mine or two heavily pushed me to apply for, and the job looked much better in person when I interviewed than on paper, and vice versa. So I think always be open to the idea that there are really lots of opportunities out there. It might not look that way on paper, but it is if you sort of pursue it a little bit more. So just
this segues well into we're going to lightning round. John, I saw your hand come up. I'm going to get to you, but I'm going to do a lightning round. Somebody said, "What's your best networking tip?" And one networking tip is, always take the call from the headhunter. Always, or apply for more jobs than you think you might be interested in, because you'll meet people and might not be the right job for you, but you may know someone for that job and you'll expand your network. That's not my number one networking tip. So I'm going to go around the horn. John, I'll go to you first. You can say what you were going to say and give your number one networking tip.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think saying what I'm going to say was this. One thing we haven't said is you actually are valuable. Okay. You need to remember you want a job, right? But you also have to work with the person who's hiring. You need to determine, can I, do I connect with that person? Maintain your confidence. Even though you are seeking a job, remember, you have a desirable skill set. They're talking to you for a reason. Then the question is, can you work with that person? Because it turns out you are coming from a field that is, like I said at the beginning, little understood beyond the field. And so you're going to need somebody to work with you to translate across the organization. So what I would say to you just generally, this is Bill and Sam's comment, is yes, you should think more flexibly, whatnot, but never lose sight of the fact that you are your own state, right? You're your own sovereign entity, and engaging with confidence will help you parse out, not just scattershot, but parse out what's really right for you. And then you'll find the right place, and that will accelerate your career. My lightning round comment, take a call from a headhunter, but also really, really concentrate and figure out quickly, what is your point of excellence? I spend a lot of time, as my lead-in, I do leadership advisory. That's basically doing assessment of CEO candidates. It's what I do. And when we debrief with a board chair CEO, we have a very simple rule, right? We may have
lightning round.
I know.
1 minute left. Nope. You said take the headhunter call. If we have room, we'll come back.
Sorry.
Steve, you're up. What's your number one networking tip?
Go back to your grad school list and ping every single person in the cohorts above you who went into industry, and reconnect and find out what they liked about their careers.
Oh, great tip. Sam, what is yours?
There was a great paper written, I think in the 1980s, The Strength of Weak Ties. So think of a Venn diagram. The people that are most valuable in your network tend to be sort of on the edge, and they can take you into other networks. Number two, English is my second language. I think I find folks, and I've had this conversation with many folks at Freddie, those who have English as a second language view sometimes that the language can be a hindrance. And to me, I view it as that's your advantage. I learned to read in a different way than English. Arabic was my first language. And so that allows me to look at problems differently than others. So I just want to put that out there because of I just think that could be really helpful to people.
That's great. All right, John, I'm coming back to you.
No, English is my first language. I use it to excess. Hey, Constance. Constance, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity and this great panel.
Thank you. All right. So my number one networking tip is you're already on a NABE call. That's great. Come to now that we've resumed NABE meetings live and in person, come to them, ask questions in sessions and go up to other people who've asked questions you find interesting and start conversations. I always find that that's a really good way to have a icebreaker and start a conversation with someone when you're at a conference or even in a meeting and someone asks a good question. You can just talk to them about what was the origin of that question, and it's a good way to strike up a conversation. So join NABE, become involved, and by all means, start coming to our conferences now that they are back to being live and in person. All right, thank you so much, everyone. This was a wonderful panel, and thank you, everybody, for taking an hour out of your day to join us.
Bye.
Thank you all. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you again, everyone, for joining today. Just as a reminder, NABE webinars are available through the NABE Connect app, which can be downloaded through the App Store and through Google Play. We also have our webinar recordings available on the NABE.com digital archive for NABE members. Thank you all again. That does conclude the event. We'll see you next time. Thank you.